Okay, so we're just waiting for notification that we are indeed live.
And we are.
Excellent.
Welcome to all our viewers. My name is MK Smith.
And I'm Bassam Haddad.
And we're both so pumped to be your co-hosts for the 4th episode of Live with ASI, the broadcast.
This is the first. We actually are now trying to figure out a couple of things. We added a teleprompter, and interestingly, we have some issues working with the teleprompter. But in the meantime, we do have an intro for you.
Yes. Okay, so first up, we are going to jump right into a discussion of content regarding culture. The revered passed away this past October. If we could just... There we go. Perfect. Thank you. Passed away in October. In commemoration of this towering figure in contemporary Iran, Niem Siemdost and Rob Sims each published pieces on Jadaliya reflecting on Shajarian's cultural significance and legacy that has made him into the much-cherished Iranian icon.
Sharif Al-Musa reflects on the work of Bahjar poet Elia Abu Madi in a piece titled Step Gently, the Political Imagination of Elia Abu Madi. Focusing on Abu Madi's political imaginary, Al-Musa describes the overarching philosophy and vision that guided Abu Madi's poetic explorations.
If you take a look at the digest, which, as our viewers know, is published a few days after the episode, you will find... Oh, actually, you'll find it posted tomorrow. Okay. You'll also find a translation of 2 poems by Iraqi poet Saidi Yusuf published on Jadaliya, as well as a book review of Culture, Pop, and Egypt. Entre mainstream commercial et contestation. Shajarian,
The Voice of Iran by Nahid Siamdust, in memory of Ostad Shajarian by Rob Sims, and Step Gently, of course, that I shared just now by Sharif Al Musa. You do have to bear with us because we have 2 issues. This thing on my
Pause it.
no, yeah, this thing is not working very well with the actual prompter. It is fine, but we're gonna struggle. So just help.
It's a humanizing experience. I hope you're humbled by our
Just work with us.
chaos. Okay, wonderful. Okay, next up, we're going to move on to our recurring old and new media segment.
And we are very excited to have with us the amazing Adil Iskandar. So we are now going to tune in and bring in Professor Adil Iskandar from Simon Fraser. مرحبا عادل. Hold on, let me unmute you. كيفك?
Good. How are you?
We are good. If you could just let us know, or the baby, or maybe let the folks know who are not very familiar with this particular segment. Maybe you can let them know what this segment is, and then share with us your gems.
Well, thank you so much, Bassam. This segment of the show is dedicated to thinking about or processing or unpacking ideas that pertain to media in our contemporary moment. And the approach in this particular segment is such that we are trying to understand the connections between what used to be the practices and institutions of the media, in the past versus the contemporary moment. And the argument here is that the differences and distinctions, while accounting for technological innovation and advancement and all the things that are happening, the extent to which we're spending so much time in front of our devices and are using platforms that we've never used before, everything from gaming to social media, etc. All of those seem to imply or suggest that we are changing. in substantial ways. And we are, but what this segment is about is to think through this change and what it means in light of traditions and histories of media production and how they impact our lives. So it's called New and Old Media because the two are intertwined in very, very interesting and compelling ways. So that's the general idea. Last month we talked about two specific stories, one about Trump, the other about Macron, and the way in which they used Twitter to essentially kickstart various political storms and how those were connected to or similar to the way in which media had been used in the past, both to propagandize or advocate for political positions. This month, we're going to be talking about another issue, and I don't know if we have the slides handy on your end. Let's see. I don't know if I can see your screen, but guessing yes. Is that a yes?
Yes, we are going to show the slides.
There we go.
Okay, beautiful. Okay, so the segment this month is pertains to the ongoing quagmire between Qatar and Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, what is often known as the Qatar Embargo, and how it's being mediated. So let's backtrack a little bit. So in July of 2017, due to a growing and escalating confrontation between Qatar and its regional adversaries over support for, or claimed support of Islamist, radical groups in the region, there was a very, very rapid escalation in the confrontation that resulted in an embargo that impacted flights and trade and diplomatic relations between Qatar and the other GCC countries, as well as the larger Arab League, or countries or members of the Arab League in a more expansive sense. So what does that mean as far as the media is concerned? Well, if you've been under a rock for the last 20 some years, you probably wouldn't have realized that Al Jazeera, namely the largest and most substantial, most well-funded news organization out of the global south, is broadcasts directly from Qatar, from Doha, Qatar, which incidentally is a few kilometers away from the largest central command of the US military. But having said that, Al Jazeera has been the thorn in the side of many governments and regimes in the region since its inception, and is one of the key demands. The shutter or the closure or the muzzling of Al Jazeera has been a key demand of many of the governments in the region, including Saudi Arabia, that are in a head-on collision with Al Jazeera. So historically, the media in the region have been deeply committed to the governments in which they broadcast. Ministries of information often governed the way in which media operate, and the same is true to this day. However, despite that, Al Jazeera came into the field, and there is the assumption that Al Jazeera is an independent news agency. It operates over 30 bureaus around the world, employs thousands of individuals, and has done some really, really substantial work as far as investigative journalism goes. However, the key question remains, is Al Jazeera independent? And are its adversaries in the media scene in the region also independent? This story that you can see before you is a not so old story about the brutal killing of Jamal Khashoggi in Turkey at the hands of Saudi consular officials. You can see here that Al Jazeera, at the very top left-hand corner, the story by Al Jazeera, very clearly the headline seems to indicate a strong acrimony towards Saudi Arabia and a direct accusation of Mohammed bin Salman, MBS, the crown prince of Saudi Arabia. This type of direct sort of adversarial coverage was extremely rare of Saudi Arabia on a Qatari news network until the embargo of 2017, and continues to this day, this type of coverage. On the other hand, if we go to the previous slide, if you don't mind, on the other hand, Al Arabiya, which is a state, not a directly state, but a semi-independent, but privately and somewhat privately owned, but fairly close to the royal family news organization, created in the image of Al Jazeera, but with very clearly oppositional standpoints, covers Qatar in quite the same light, very adversarial. So you could see here highlighting a particular incident on Qatar Airways where women who were flying on an aircraft were subjected to invasive bodily examinations and sexual examinations because of a particular incident. And this received a tremendous amount of coverage on Al Arabiya. Not disproportionate, but nevertheless, compared to what Al Arabiya typically covers, very, very substantial visibility. So you could see here that media are being used and employed as part of a collision course between two respective states. But as Freedom House, a US-based, or Washington, D.C.-based nonprofit that advocates for media freedom, the direction of liberalization of media in the region has been such that we have been actively promoting the privatization of media in the region. So if we actively privatize government media, we end up getting the equivalent of Al Arabiya and Al Jazeera. News organizations deeply committed to advocating government policy, but on the face value, they seem to be independent, commercially and politically. If we go to the next slide, sorry, the slide after that. Today, or in these days, we now have Jared Kushner making a last gasp attempt in his travels around the Gulf to try and break the impasse between the Qataris and the Saudis. And this is a story from Al Jazeera. As you can see here, Al Jazeera is strongly advocating, or appearing to be strongly advocating, a future détente between those two countries. With that comes a very, very rapid disappearance of the direct escalation that we described previously between the Qataris and the Saudis. We can imagine if there is an agreement between the Saudis and the Qataris whereby they can, play safe or play good in the playground of political nations, all of a sudden we'll begin to see a disappearance of this type of acrimonious coverage in both of their respective networks. So with that being said, the real question remains, as much as we've seen a liberalization and openness and a freedom of the media in the region at large, can we safely say that media in the region are independent? All signs seems to indicate, with this particular case being an exemplar, that the media, for the most part, are just neoliberal versions of their authoritarian selves, meaning that the no different from the way ministries of information were used in the past, they continue to be used today to advocate the policies that governments wish to see fit. So the final slide, and I'm not going to say anything about it. Do Qatari officials genuinely believe in freedom of information, or are they using Al Jazeera as a public relations tool to enhance their country's image overseas? And you can exchange this, the word Qatari with the Saudi, with the Egyptian, with the Libyan, with the Iraqi, etc., etc., etc. Unfortunately, ministries of information continue to govern media in the region, even though they have incredibly flashy CGIs as logos and bureaus all over the world and people from all walks of life representing their coverage. All right, that's a wrap.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Adil. This has been a very important segment for us. Let me put you on the screen. Thank you very much, Adil. This has been a very important segment for us. We have to bend over so that we can both see the screen.
We all fit.
So basically, we will expect you to come and join us every month for this section, and I know that you have a lot of special sort of sub-segments in store, so we look forward to seeing you more often.
Awesome. Thank you.
Take
care, everyone.
Bye.
Shukran. Take care.
Bye.
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 And next up, we're going to bring in Bassam's best friend in the entire world.
Yes, it's not the way we are advertising this, but it's Sinan Antoun, Professor Sinan Antoun from NYU, who is actually the guru of the Arabic knowledge production at ASI, and we will bring him on screen to share with us some of the knowledge production here on Jadaliya and ASI, and he will probably do it in Arabic. So first, let's welcome him.
Hi, Sinan.
Hey, hi
مرحبا
guys.
سنان.
أهلا وسهلا.
كيفك؟
كويس، زين، ممتاز، منيح. واخا لا باس.
Wacha. Sinan, we're very excited that you're joining us, and we want to do this segment in Arabic in the hopes of progressively actually doing this segment as its own segment, maybe even outside Live with ASI. So we would love for you to share with us some of the knowledge production in Arabic, and I know that you will be doing it in Arabic, so I'll leave it up to you.
Thanks, Habibi. Yes, this is the Arabic minute or 2 minutes where I will talk about, just give an idea about the material we're publishing. So I'm going to do it in Arabic. أهلا وسهلا بكم جميعا. هذه نبذة سريعة عن بعض ما نشرناه في جدلية في الأسابيع الأخيرة. واحد من كتابنا يزن الحاج نشر عدد من المقالات الثقافية، واحد عن محفوظ ومنيف، يعني نجيب محفوظ عبد الرحمن منيف، إعادة رسم الخرائط، وأخرى عن الكاتب السوري إبراهيم صاموئيل بعنوان ماذا ترون من الشباك، ومقالات عن غائب طعم فرمان الروائي العراقي، وعن غسان كنفاني الروائي الفلسطيني، ومقالة أخرى عن حيدر الروائي السوري. من بغداد كتب لنا نبيل صالح مقالة بعنوان عودة الحياة إلى طبيعتها في غابة الخوذ الحديدية عن الوضع المأساوي في بغداد هذه الأيام. هوزان شيخي كتب لنا ماركو بولو ووحيد القرن الذاكرة تكذب عن السلطة على الحكاية والتاريخ. واحد من زملائنا في فريق التحرير أسامة إسبر ترجم مختارات من كتاب إدواردو غاليانو صناعة الخوف، وقصائد مختارة للشاعرة الأمريكية ماري أوليفر، وترجم مقالة كتبتها ناهد سيام دوست عن رحيل الفنان الإيراني المعروف محمد رضا شجريان صوت إيران. من مصر كتب أحمد عبد الحليم مقالة بعنوان مصر أقسام الشرطة وإفساد المواطنين، وأخرى في نفس الموضوع والسياق الجسد والسلطة والحق في القتل. وفي باب المراجعات كتب لنا جعفر العلوني مراجعة لترجمة جديدة بعنوان الأمل وحيدا، لترجمة لقصائد الشاعرة كيم سينغ هي من كوريا الجنوبية.
Sinan, you are with us. Now you are with us twice. Can you hear me? You've been on the whole time. So if you have finished, let us know. If you need to continue, please go ahead. Okay, we seem to. Okay, thank you so much, Sinan. I hope we can do this again, and we are looking forward to developing this as a standalone segment. Shukran, Sinan. Thank you very much. At this point, actually, we have to adjust something. If you can just give us a second. There we go. Here we go. There we go. And we're on. Madame, Demoiselle.
Excellent. So, should we talk about it? Or...
we actually might as well. So there is an elephant in the room, and we are going to address it right now. The Iran page had decided to temporarily take down an article published on 22 November titled Mourners in Common, Qasim Sulaimani, Muhammad Riza Shajarian, and the Pattern of Iranian Culture. They decided to take it down in order to pair the piece with a range of responses they are currently processing. Their intention is to make this an inclusive process and welcome others to participate by submitting their responses, in addition to giving the author an opportunity to weigh in on the discussion that will ensue.
The decision to temporarily take down the post stems from a recognition that it was a mistake to publish the article in its current form, while also recognizing that it is not acceptable to permanently retract the article after publication. The Iran Page team is committed to an analysis of power relations, a critique of domination along multiple registers, and a capacious and multifaceted understanding of the regions and peoples to which the Iran Page is dedicated.
And we will be right back after this brief interlude. And we are very excited to announce today a very important piece of news, which is the production of the fall 2020 issue of the Arab Studies Journal. Woo! And it is actually now available. You can check it out at arabstudiesjournal.org. So many people put in countless hours and hard work to produce this issue, which offers insights on how techniques of inclusion and exclusion shape possibilities for belonging, collective life, political solidarity, and social contestation.
Fantastic. We were fortunate enough to have ASJ co-editors Ziad Abu Rish and Owen Lawson to interview to tell us more about this exciting issue.
Yes, we are going to actually go to the interview with Ziad and Owen, who were graciously available to do this with us. So here you go. That was actually not Ziad and Owen, if you noticed. This was basically the credits, but Ziad and Owen are right here.
This is the first issue under our co-editorship after more than 10 years of leadership by Shireen Say Ali. So we have to recognize that the ability of this issue to come out and most of the content in it was actually completed under the leadership and through the hard labor of Shireen Say Ali, who has bequeathed us a wonderful publication and organization that we're going to tell you a little bit more about in terms of the content today.
Great, yeah, thank you so much for having us to talk about this, Bassem. So for this, the fall issue 2020, we have 4 articles, which I think really reflect the best kind of interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary principles that Arab Studies Journal tries to stick to. The 4 articles, the first one is by Reem Naguib. It's called The Ideological Deportation of Foreigners and Local Subjects of Foreign Extraction in Interwar Egypt. It's a history piece that looks at the deportation of socialists and syndicalists who are often had lived their entire lives within a kind of Ottoman or Egyptian polity by the British under when Egypt was under British colonization. And the second article is by Ren al-Mutawa, which is called Glitzy Malls and Coffee Shops, Everyday Places of Belonging and Social Contestation in Dubai. It's an ethnography of malls, new developments, and these kind of glitzy spaces, glamorous spaces, which are often narrated as being for tourists, and how this author's Emirati interlocutors construct a sense of belonging and social togetherness in these spaces. And for those first 2 articles, Naguib and al-Mutawa, there's also Newton interviews with them that we published on Jedaliya. The third article is titled On the State's Educational Apparatus, Zionization and Minoritarianism of Druze Consciousness in Israel by Yusri Khaizaran. So in this piece, Khaizaran analyzes Israeli school curricula as a particular site for the production of Druze identity and political sensibility, severed and distinct from their Palestinian, Arab, and Islamic milieus. And lastly, we have an article by Sima Shahsari titled Displacing Queer Refugee Epistemologies, Dreams of Trespass, Queer Kinship, and the Politics of Miseration. So in this piece, Shahsari reads Fatima Manisi's 1994 book, Dreams of Trespass, to reconsider queer kinship through temporal bonds and alliances.
I'd just like to follow up on the wonderful article section, which is really a collaborative result of the various members of the articles team, to also acknowledge a really robust book review section. I'm not going to go over all the books that have been reviewed in it, but I think it represents the attempt since the founding of Arab Studies Journal to bring together senior scholars and early career scholars, both as authors and as reviewers. I think combined between the article sections that Owen described and the review section, we see that the kind of journal that has come to fruition as a result of 28 years of publication, first under the leadership of yourself, Bassam, but then under Nadia Speiti and Shireen Say Ali, and then of course Shireen Say Ali. And so it's a real pleasure to be working with the reviews team, the articles team, the administrative team, and an honor to try and take ASJ to the next level.
Well, that was certainly informative.
Absolutely.
Next up, we want to go ahead and feature a roundtable that was published on Jadaliya's Critical Currents and Islam page. The roundtable is entitled State Islam After the Arab Uprisings, and it features contributions from Mohammed Amesh, Nathan J. Brown, Walla Kissay, and David Warren. And we are fortunate enough to have the co-editor of the Critical Currents and Islam page, Abdullah Al-Aryan, with us today.
Abdullah is joining us
momentarily.
Abdullah, can you are you with us? I think he dropped, the link got dropped. So we are actually...
We can give you some filler information.
Yes.
Abdullah is an associate professor of history at Georgetown University, Qatar. I actually studied with him. I had 2 classes with him. Very exciting stuff.
You're always good at making things so nice.
I know too much about too many people is what I'm getting at.
And Abdullah is, of course, a co-editor, or he is a co-editor or the editor of the Critical Currents in Islam page on Jadaliya. And he was supposed to join us, but for some reason he must be having issues. So we will actually try to go to the next segment and then try to bring him back.
Pull him back in.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Well, we'll just jump around here. We're just gonna...
Yep.
There we go. Okay, so clearly we're having some technical difficulties today, but we're just like working it out.
I think it's finals exam, and it's a very stressful time for so many people. So things are actually accumulating, and I could actually.
What's your excuse? You're on
steps.
You're on sabbatical. You don't have final exams.
I'm just not teaching. There he is. Abdullah's back.
Okay.
Here we go.
Perfect.
Abdullah, how are you? You are muted.
You don't have him on the screen yet.
Hi, Abdullah. How are you?
I'm all right. How are you?
Very, very good. Very good. So we are very excited that you are joining us, and we need to hear about the fantastic roundtable that you led. So if you can just take the floor, just take a couple minutes, let us know about this roundtable, and then we will release you from our bondage.
Well, this is the fruits of, I would say, many years of working on this specific topic. I think this is a very big part of what the Critical Currents in Islam page has been about since its launch back in 2013, in which we've been trying to kind of emphasize our focus on how forces within society in the Middle East that root their identities, their activism, their mobilization, their political visions in some kind of contemporary or modern day version or interpretation of the Islamic tradition have impacted their societies. So oftentimes what this has meant really is looking at the impact of Islamist movements, usually in the mold of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and its various offshoots across the Arab region. And to a lesser extent, we've looked at Salafi groups that have all of whom have operated largely within this kind of nation state framework. But then we've also looked at other kinds of movements like jihadist groups like Daesh and others, and kind of their impact as well. And so I think what this newest roundtable represents is the more recent tendency to try to turn this discussion on its head by looking not only at social forces that have organized and mobilized in a way to try and sort of contest the political scene on a popular level, but thinking more in terms of how states themselves have employed religious language, symbols, movements, institutions as a way of trying to legitimize themselves within Islamic terms. So far from being the kind of bastion of secular nationalism, the authoritarian state in the Arab world is just as likely to employ the use of Islam in its attempt to justify itself. And so this process has really become even more pronounced since the Arab uprisings, especially because those Islamist groups pose such a threat to the stability of the authoritarian structures. Since at least 2013, we've seen a kind of surge in the uses of Islamic figures, institutions, bodies of knowledge to try and justify and kind of buttress the positions of a lot of authoritarian states. And we've seen this particularly through the support of governments like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, but also, especially, for instance, in the aftermath of the coup in Egypt in 2013. And so to help us explore this phenomenon, we brought together a number of scholars who've really been kind of on the cutting edge of working on this topic. And this includes Muhammad Amashad, Nathan Brown, Wala Qusay, and David Warren. And so they've sort of put together their collective expertise on this question of religion and authoritarianism, the politics of the ulama, how Muslims respond to these challenges of tradition and modernity. And they've all kind of offered different perspectives and different kinds of approaches, both in terms of thinking about what is the methodology here. Is it sufficient to simply rely on kind of traditional Islamic studies as a field to look at this phenomenon, or do we need to incorporate, as one of our contributors says, some social sciences approaches to the way that we think of how kind of religion maneuvers within the political and social spheres in this context. We also have Nathan Brown, who talks a little bit about the need to distinguish between state Islam and regime Islam, which further complicates the picture because we're then not looking only at this binary of these sort of popular religious forces and then this kind of cynical regime use of Islam, but there's even this kind of category in the middle, which is the kind of looking specifically at state Islam as the combination of bureaucracies, official structures that don't necessarily go hand in hand with the regime, and we see the kind of tensions that exist there. We've also seen how the establishment of particular institutions not only serve the interest of the state, but sometimes this sort of ulama class as well gets implicated in these power relationships precisely because it bolsters their agendas as well. So we see the kinds of, and this is something that Wala Qusay has mentioned in her contribution as far as the way that a number of institutions like this Forum for Promoting Peace in Muslim Societies becomes kind of implicated in its approach to how regional disputes and politics have worked, particularly around the kind of Qatar UAE sort of breakdown in that relationship, and seeing how a forum like this tends to kind of try to confer legitimacy on the UAE position, labeling other groups as terrorist organizations. It's there as well to bolster the Zionist normalization project, which we've just seen the UAE and its neighbors kind of engaging in. And so I think in that sense, it's important to also think about how these become implicated in some of the broader regional conflicts and also this sort of global counterterrorism sort of structure that we've been seeing kind of not just normalized, but even endorsed through the participation of some of these religious figures. And so these are just kind of some examples of the kinds of things that come out of this discussion. And I think it was a really fruitful roundtable, and I hope that people will take a look at it.
Thank you, Abdullah, for this
Thank you.
fantastic presentation. Let me get you back in. So we are very happy that this was published because of a number of developments on the ground that makes it imperative. And I understand that you have actually worked on a number of other roundtables, which we will actually include in the digest. They are on very similar topics having to do with political Islam and changes within that broader array of topics, not least in the reference to the Arab uprisings. Thank you very much, Muhammad. And
Abdullah.
Muhammad or Abdullah? I've only known you for like 7 years. Thank you very much, Abdullah. Why did I say Muhammad? Because he's Muslim. Noura is telling me because he's Muslim. And we will move right now to the actual discussion on the elections. We'll see you soon, Abdullah.
Thanks, Abdullah.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, as we know, the elections were stressful, to say the least. Luckily, Bassem was able to keep his head through all of it and hosted a 5-part series of live stream discussions entitled The 2020 Election and Whatnot.
This series is part of the Shar Conversations podcast conducted jointly with Jadaliya and the Shar School for Policy and Government at George Mason University, where I actually teach. I interviewed several scholars regarding rifts in U.S. politics and the Democratic Party, the party system, and statehood in Puerto Rico, and what the prospects for a messy transition of power could mean.
We also have a very special guest joining us in the studio today. She has braved the harrowing journey all the way from upstairs to come talk about the elections and her recently published Washington Post article, Biden May Offer Some Key Opportunities for Palestinians and Their Allies. Thank you so much for joining us, Noura.
Thank you for having me.
So can you tell us a little bit, obviously you wrote this article, it's awesome. If you could tell us a little bit about what you discuss in the piece.
So in the piece, yes?
Yes, perfect.
That's the camera right there.
So I can come downstairs often. I don't often sit in this seat, so apologies for the clumsiness. In the piece that I penned for the Washington Post, I wanted to capture some nuance in the debate around whether or not Biden offers anything. I think this is one of the really most difficult part of being part of a progressive left and in opposition to Trump, insistent on casting an anti-fascist vote, but not in any way having faith in the alternative represented by Biden, but understanding that a Biden electoral victory would create and beseech much better organizing conditions, right? That was basically it. It's not that the Biden administration was going to offer better policies, where we've seen that and is evidenced by his cabinet picks, by things that he's been on record, but by the fact that for several reasons, not least of which is wanting to maintain some sort of liberal veneer, would offer optimal material conditions for organizing. And so I start the piece by basically establishing the lack of distinction between the Democratic and the Republican establishment as it concerns the question of Palestine. We already know that the DNC's 2020 platform explicitly says that the U.S. embassy to Israel will not be moved back from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv, which was one of the most controversial moves during the Trump administration, though, as I articulate, that it's been subsequent Democratic administrations that have led to this moment, and thus the move of the embassy basically removes the emperor's clothes. And I also insist that Trump would be different because of his brazenness and because of the bombastic nature of his approach, would be distinct from any alternative, even a Republican one. And so that we shouldn't be confused about what the political structure looks like in terms of its potential for Palestine. Notwithstanding that, I then articulate at least 2 opportunities that would be afforded by a Biden administration. One is the opportunity of time. The Trump administration introduced into the question of Palestine different damning policy changes that were in the pipeline, might have been an inevitability, but happened with such rapid speed that it eliminated the opportunity for us as Palestinians and allies to be able to respond in a meaningful way and to have some sort of strategic intervention. So that was the first. We were so busy. You're responding to Jerusalem, then you're responding to the massacre of children marching in the Gaza March of Return, and then you're responding to the media that is framing, blaming the children for their own deaths. And then you're also battling against, the redefinition of Title VI that adopts the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. So now that any position against Zionism is potentially punishable within the realm of education and civil litigation. So time. The second opportunity that the Biden administration offers is the opportunity within the Democratic establishment itself, which is the fact that within the Democratic establishment, there is an increasing progressive insurgency that is creating a wedge between the Democratic establishment and this left alternative, which is not to say that there's faith in the electoral process, but that this insurgency is fueled by grassroots movements. They are reflecting their needs. They are reflecting the street in a way that is actually disrupting all of Congress's business as usual. I say take advantage of that progressive insurgency where in the grassroots, Palestine has been increasingly included within the progressive agenda. And this is the time to solidify Palestine's inclusion in that agenda in order so that it can continue to reverberate. As we've seen, the squad has already articulated a position that's broken with the Democratic establishment on Palestine. And now we've also seen several new members of Congress elected, including Cori Bush from Missouri, including Jamal Bowman, from New York, who are also beginning their careers by articulating this anti-establishment position, which indicates to us that there is work to do and that whatever Biden offers isn't what he's going to give us, but what we make of the space he will create.
Thank you very much, Noura, for this. We actually will probably be reposting the piece on Jadaliya. Are there any closing words that you'd like to share, given that the article was written a while ago, even though I know that you actually addressed present and current material? Is there anything else you'd like to share or leave us with that is not utterly pessimistic? Or is there any light?
Where's the joy?
Where's the joy? That I don't have any parting words regarding this analytical moment. I think that this is going to continue to be an issue, and one thing that I take faith in and a lot of joy from, because we've seen some really disappointing moves from the Palestinian political official leadership as well, as they've basically put a hand out to the Biden administration, even without any facts on the ground changing. They have reestablished their diplomatic missions in the UAE and Bahrain. They have resuscitated security coordination with Israel. So there's a lot of pessimism. What I would say is that the fact that the work continues, that Palestine remains alive, that it has increased its space within the academy as well as grassroots movements, and certainly in the cultural realm, is really the work of an undying commitment, of a decentralized movement, of the work of networks that we should not undermine, nor should we search for a messiah or a centralized leadership to move us forward, but to continue to invest, pay attention, and be a part of these different efforts. So that there's the joy.
That's actually not so bad. Noura's sitting right there. So thank you very much, Noura. We hope to have you join us more often to address any developments within that broader topic that actually involves the entire region.
Thank you. I look forward to coming back downstairs.
Absolutely.
Woo-hoo. I learn so much every time she speaks. Every time. Okay, we have so many great new texts out now that we want to be sure to feature. However, there are so many of them that we're not going to list them all out to you. Instead, we're going to play a quick clip so you can take a look at all those different features. Okay, as you can see, there are a lot of new texts out now. We do want to draw your attention to just a few that we think you might be interested in.
We'll highlight a couple of those Newtons because we, as MK shared, cannot actually go through all of them. There are so many, they'll be in the digest. You can find the rest of the Newtons with the descriptions there at any moment starting tomorrow, including the Middle East in 1958, Reimagining a Revolutionary Year, edited by Jeffrey Karam, presents a dialogue between several scholars and practitioners specializing in different aspects of the post-colonial moment in 1958 and its connections to broader revolutionary struggles, both failed and successful across the Middle East. And it's really, I know that we had some glitches today. Let's take a moment. But I'm really happy that we are actually looking at the camera, not at a screen over here to actually read the script that Muhammad so faithfully wrote.
Yes, yeah. I agree. Also, in a Newton on his book, Winning Lebanon, Youth Politics, Populism, and the Production of Sectarian Violence from 1920 to 1958, Dylan Bond discusses the main themes as well as historical events the book deals with, as well as connections to 2019 and its revolution in Lebanon. Again, check out the digest to see even more Newtons, including things about architecture and social contestation in Dubai and how to teach the Middle East. There's really so much ground to cover.
Yeah, and it's really important to note that one of the major segments in Jadaliyya since 2010, 2011 has been the Newton section, because it allows you not only to learn about the new texts that are coming up and being produced in the region, but it also presents them through the viewpoint of the authors themselves, where they write about the book, its production, its content, and why they wrote it, and how it connects to other material in the field.
Okay, now as you know, a cornerstone of what we do here at ASI is related to pedagogy and pedagogical content. With that said, we're now going to turn to Kat Haseman, ASI's media coordinator, for a segment called the Grad Student Corner.
And Kat has been also a communications coordinator at the Arab Studies Institute. Welcome, Kat. She jumped in right away and became a cornerstone of what we are doing at ASI and here at Live with ASI. So here's Kat.
Hi, I'm Kat, and this is the Grad Student Corner. I'm here to point all of our student viewers to the ASI content that they'll find most useful. You all know about Newtons, or New Texts Out Now, but I want to emphasize this resource for graduate students specifically. If you've never clicked on a Newton article before, you wouldn't realize that they're essentially behind-the-scenes interviews with the author of a recently published book. From the interview, you can not only learn about the author's scholarly motivations, but the interviews also hit on the core argument of the piece and distill the main takeaways. So reading a Newton before you crack open the book can be extremely helpful. This past week, for example, I was putting together an annotated bibliography on Mandate Palestine. So I read over the Newton for Carly Beckerman's book, Unexpected State, British Politics and the Creation of Israel. Beckerman's book details 4 case studies of British policy in Palestine and asks why and how political battles in London inadvertently laid the foundations for the establishment of the State of Israel. Reading the Newton interview really helps me to get my bearings and then decide what chapters I wanted to read more deeply. Another Newton I recommend checking out is part of our pedagogy initiative, and it's called Understanding and Teaching the Modern Middle East, edited by Omnia Al-Shakri. This book is on my winter break to read list, and if you haven't figured out what you're going to read over break, I highly recommend checking out the Newtons. It's a good place to start. That's all I've got for now. Good luck with finals. I'll see you next time. Hi, I'm Kat, and this is the Grad Student.
No.
Not again, no. But great, thank you so much, Kat. That was very, very helpful. Another resource that grad students might find helpful, I know I really enjoyed it and saw it as really an inspirational event and a way of contextualizing myself within Arab studies. What?
I just want to say that when you started talking and I looked at you and I was like, I wasn't listening. I had no idea what you were saying.
Okay.
It's just like I was trying to be
You just know to agree with me.
No, because we had to deal with that
snafu. Yeah.
I do also know how to agree with you.
Yes,
Assalamu
thank you.
alaikum.
The event I'm speaking of is the MIA's keynote lecture. So on November 19th, the Middle East and Islamic Studies program at George Mason University presented an annual keynote lecture titled Cooking in the Cauldron, Suad Joseph on Middle East Studies from 1966 to 2020.
The lecture was a joint effort between George Mason University's Center for Global Islamic Studies and, of course, the Arab Studies Institute. Suad Joseph is Distinguished Research Professor of Anthropology and Gender, Sexuality, and Women's Studies at UC Davis. In this lecture, we reflected on the trajectory of Middle East studies since the 1960s and discussed how successive generations of students and academics managed to carve out some space for critical, regionally grounded research in the field.
We have a couple highlight clips from the lecture up on our Twitter and Instagram, and you can also be sure to watch the lecture by clicking on it in our digest, which will be up tomorrow.
Absolutely. And let us do another interlude. I think these are like...
Yes. All right, let's continue talking about some pedagogy. The peer-reviewed articles review team, led by Shakila Omar, has collected articles dealing with the Middle East published during the summer from journals directly dealing with the region or having content that often addresses the Middle East. We shared the first two installments of the summer 2020 list last episode and wanted to let you know that now parts 3 and 4 are available as well.
We also have a Scholars in Context piece with Nihat Çelik, whose work has focused on contemporary Turkish foreign policy and diplomatic history, and another with Dilsa Deniz, who's, I'm sorry if I am messing up the pronunciation of the Turkish names. They've
You didn't do what I did. Last night, I sat in my bed and I read names over and over and over. I'm not saying I did it right,
yeah, but
I'm saying I tried.
But they didn't rule you guys for like 500
That's fair.
years.
That's
They
totally
ruled
fair.
us.
I'm sorry. I
that's getting you back.
didn't contextualize my privilege there. I'm sorry.
And another with Dilsa Deniz, whose research addresses Kurdish Alevism and Derism.
Great.
And their connections to socio-political constructions. The Scholars in Context series is a very important series that addresses the research of scholars from the region and often writing in their own language. And we are very happy to feature this section at Jadaliyya under the rubric of Newton, but with reference to research as opposed to books.
While on the topic of pedagogy, we have some very exciting news coming from the Political Economy Project, one of ASI's essential branches. Since its founding in 2015, one of PEP's cornerstones is to provide opportunities and training for students and emerging researchers, both from the region and beyond.
To these ends, a new book titled A Critical Political Economy of the Middle East and North Africa, edited by myself and fellow Jadaliyya co-editor Shireen Say Ali and the political economy sheikh Joel Bainin, is now available for pre-order from Stanford University Press. This book offers a critical engagement with the political economy of the Middle East and North Africa. These cutting-edge essays, and they are really compelling and insightful, and I hope you get a chance to take a look at the book. These essays demonstrate how critical political economy can illuminate both historical and contemporary dynamics of the region and contribute to a wider political economy, debates from the vantage point of the Middle East. And one of the reasons we actually started the political economy project is to make sure that it gets inserted and integrated organically into the field of Middle East studies and not be something that is discussed on the side. Like, you basically have these panels or discussions where people talk about all sorts of things and then say, oh, what about the political economy perspective, as if it is parasitic on the discourse. Same thing with gender. People address gender as if it's okay. Now let's look at the gender viewpoint or the viewpoint, regarding gender. And these things should be very much integrated organically into Middle East studies and analysis.
I mean, look at this lineup of scholars who are featured. I mean,
yeah, that's pretty cool. So
best of the best.
We have Joel Bainin, Kristen Alf, Max Isle, myself, Zainab Abul Majd, Timothy Mitchell, Shayna Marshall, Adam Haniye, Aaron Jakes, Ahmed Shukr, Nida Al-Ahmed, Maryam Hali Davis, Ziad Abu Rish, and Samia Al-Butmi. And you can find, of course, all this information in the digest.
Now, as we wind down, we want to spotlight the Roundtable on Engineers, Technopolitics, and the Environment, published on Jadaliyya, which consisted of a series of articles written by 7 scholars from the social sciences and humanities. The Roundtable called for renewed attention to the role of engineers in techno-political and environmental projects throughout the Middle East.
Daniel Saleh and Muhammad Rafi Arifin.
You got it.
So these 2 people wrote the introductory piece where they discuss their goals in the Roundtable and briefly introduce the articles included in the series.
This is a good time to also promote the recently published Essential Readings post titled Land, Water, and the Environment in Israel's Occupied Palestinian Territories, written by one of the contributors to this engineering roundtable, Sophia Stamatopoulou Robbins. And I apologize if I missed a few vowels in there.
Yes. Of course, the roundtable includes a number of articles which, for some reason, are included in the teleprompter. So we're basically waiting for them to roll.
Rolling. Now we know for next time not to include these. Yeah. Okay, time for rapid fire content.
Yes. Now we have a new segment. We are debuting. Debuting? I wasn't born here.
Ready?
Yeah.
Debuting. It doesn't sound like a real word anymore, though.
I said debuting. I mean, it's been
That's
38
okay.
years I've been here, and I still say
okay.
the T. Yeah.
It's okay.
Debuting here. So this is a rapid fire segment. Here we'll give you a quick rundown of the notable independent pieces and content that we highly recommend.
In a piece titled Thermidor of Public Education, Privatization 40 Years After the Iranian Revolution, authors Mohammad Reza Niknejad and Behnem Zogi Rodasari recount the specific erosion of public education in Iran and its relationship to privatization and development.
Idris Jibari wrote a 2-part series about Moroccan thinker and historian Abdallah Laroui. The first article investigates Laroui's apparent intellectual shift from revolutionary romanticism. I almost misread shift, and this would have been really bad. The first article investigates Laroui's apparent intellectual shift from revolutionary romanticism to reformist pragmatism, while the second article explores Laroui's connection to youth. Muhammad, you could actually use his last name less because I can't pronounce the R's, and it's a whole thing.
Notes for next time. Also in the digest, you can check out more of our independent content, including content on Kurdology in Turkey, the peace process, reflections on the 1917 Balfour Declaration, so on and so forth.
You want to address some of these, or?
Yeah. Okay, so we've got pieces on violence and political theory. We've got some content on the Great Return that Bassem already mentioned. Some more content on the Great Return. Some stuff on Kurdology. Yeah, more Kurdology.
In Turkey, Barometer of the Peace Process.
Also, there's an awesome book panel discussion about refugees and international law, which was moderated by Noura.
Yep. Yeah. It's all on Jadaliyya.
Our next feature segment will highlight an awesome roundtable. Oh, nope. We're past that. We already did that.
Yeah,
that's okay.
That was Abdullah or Muhammad, known otherwise as Muhammad, who joined us earlier.
We just wanted to spice things up, so we said, let's just rearrange the entire script at the last minute. So now that's what we're working through. Real quick. We're almost there, I promise.
It's okay. We're going to do a quick interlude.
Okay, Bassem scrolled past his line, so I'm just going to assume what it said, which was before we wrap up, we want to give you a quick teaser of the content we'll be having published with regards to the 10-year anniversary of the Arab Uprisings coming up. This is a huge deal for us. Jadaliyya's inception, our commitment to critical knowledge production, and personal engagements with the 2011 uprisings and their aftermath really make us want to do a fantastic job in covering the Arab uprisings 10 years on.
And we are actually, as I shared last time, we are actually working with a number of partner institutions to produce a year-long set of events and publications, as well as activities that center on 10 years of Arab uprisings, starting with the six that were the most prominent starting in 2011, ending with the four that emerged in 2019 and after, namely Lebanon, Algeria, Iraq, and Sudan. And to that end, the Arab Studies Institute is teaming up with the Arab Barometer at Princeton, as well as George Mason's Middle East and Islamic Studies program, to lead this effort with other partners, including Georgetown University's Center for Contemporary Arab Studies and its equivalent in Doha, the Georgetown branch in Doha, Qatar, as well as the American University of Beirut, Birzeit University, hopefully American University in Cairo, and potentially Exeter University, SOAS, a few other universities in Europe and beyond. So we are very excited about this year-long project, which you will begin seeing material from very shortly, not least on December 17th, which commemorates 10 years since Abu Azizi immolated himself.
So obviously there's a ton of content to look forward to, and we don't want to leave you hanging and just like waiting for our January episode, which we know you will be waiting anyways, but we wanted to give you a little taste of what's to come.
Absolutely. On that note, we'll leave you with an excerpt from an interview by our jovial and awesome Jacob Besson with an authority on popular politics in the Middle East, John Chalcraft. You'll find the full interview soon on Status Al Wada podcast. But for now, we have an excerpt for you from that interview.
All right, welcome. I'm here with John Chalcraft, professor at the London School of Economics. Professor Chalcraft, thank you so much for joining us today.
No, thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Great. So we're speaking with regards to a 2018 essential reading you submitted on uprisings, resistance, and popular mobilization in the Middle East. A really great piece, part of a series for us. And so first, I feel unfair asking you this question with such a kind of limited amount of time we've given you, but what is the relevance for studying revolutions and uprisings in the Middle East for our current political moment?
Well, I think part of the key to this is thinking about the sort of context that we're in, which is that you had these very inspiring uprisings in 2011 in the Arab world in the name of bread, dignity, and freedom, millions coming out onto the streets. Then a sort of period of retrenchment, counter-revolution, forms of sectarianism, but you have ongoing protests, whether it's Iraq in Morocco or in Algeria or in Lebanon or Sudan or Iraq, and these are also keying into moments of popular struggle in other parts of the world, whether it's Black Lives Matter or transnational Palestine solidarity, But part of this context is that even though you have this quite upsurge of popular self-activity and popular struggle, the actual way it's translated into transforming state and society has been, there's been so many defeats and problems and disappointments. So part of studying uprisings, protests, and revolution right now is partly in this moment between sort of popular self-activity and revolutionary upsurge, but a huge difficulty, defeats, and problems in translating that into state and society, into economic, social, and cultural transformation. So it's almost that, it's this kind of, it's that problematic that sort of shapes the context for thinking about the study of revolutions and uprisings now. But it means there's a really urgent agenda around this issue.
Great. And so my last question is, what are your hopes for the field of kind of studies on revolution and uprisings in the Middle East? What are your aspirations?
Well, the hopes for the field, pessimism of the intellect tells us that there are quite formidable obstacles to developing a kind of historically informed, critical, engaged, and progressive sort of research praxis on uprisings and revolution in the Middle East. You're not only out there in the real world, right-wing populism, imperialism, liberalism, the repression of research and education in the MENA, but also, and this has been felt very hard in Britain, is the marketization of the university and research, quite big on my list that's a problem is the transformation of the research grant making structure into a kind of mind-numbing neoliberal bureaucracy. There's also the fact that in Middle East studies, in universities, that can be a conveyor belt that leads graduates into, government, security sector, ruling groups, or into middle-class punditry, or into top-down professionalized advocacy and development of human rights. Those aren't necessarily virtues. And you also have in other, some of the disciplines, the kind of rigor mortis of positivism, mechanical determinism, objectivism, that sort of takes its pound of flesh from Middle East studies when it sort of eats into the disciplines. And then you get, almost as a reaction on the other side, some very abstracted or purely normative forms of theorizing in cultural studies or post-structuralism. So those are, there's pessimism of the will there, of the intellect, but there's optimism of the will. That the popular struggles that I mentioned before since 2011, I mean, they're having their impact on the academy right now, and they're bound to, and you have new generations coming up, you have new movements. I think Black Lives Matter has made a difference, transnational Palestine solidarity. There must be ways in which universities can engage better with the sort of constituencies that are coming forward. You also have, the Middle East Studies Association of America has become more active and interesting in the last couple of years. And I should mention, I sit here in Britain. The British Society for Middle East Studies has gone through a very far-reaching transformation. I mean, this was a very conservative National Association for Middle East Studies in Britain for a long period of time, and it's been transformed. I mean, one or two, at least two generations of progressive and engaged scholars and others have been excluded from that society, or they haven't been able to have an impact. But in the last couple of years, and especially around issues of BDS and Palestine, that's changed that society. And those things count. They don't, change the world in a day, but they count for something. And there's always a what Gramsci would call a war of position in the universities, in that kind of organizational and cultural terrain. There are always struggles to be fought, even if they seem at the time that if you opt out of those struggles, then that's not a good legacy. So there's a battle. It's always a battle. I mean, perhaps one shouldn't expect anything else. You can't, and so the prognosionary upsurge, but a huge difficulty. You also have, the Middle East Studies Association of America has become more active and interesting in the last couple of years. And I should mention, I sit here in Britain. The British Society for Middle East Studies has gone through a very far-reaching transformation. I mean, this was a very conservative National Association for Middle East Studies in Britain for a long period of time, and it's been transformed. I mean, one or two, at least two generations of progressive and engaged scholars and others have been excluded from that society, or they haven't been able to have an impact. But in the last couple of years, and especially around issues of BDS and Palestine, that's changed that society. And those things count. They don't change the world in a day, but they count for something. And there's always a what Gramsci would call a war of position in the universities, in that kind of organizational and cultural terrain. There are always struggles to be fought, even if they seem at the time that if you opt out of those struggles, then that's not a good legacy. So there's a battle. It's always a battle. I mean, perhaps one shouldn't expect anything else. You can't, and so the prognosis for developing a kind of historically minded and critically engaged studies of popular uprisings and protests in Middle East studies, it will depend. It'll depend on will and initiative, as well as on sort of crushing conditions and difficult forces that we're bound to contend with, and that popular struggles also contend with.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining me, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right, welcome. I'm here with John Chalcraft, professor at the London School of Economics. Professor Chalcraft, thank you so much for joining us today.
Okay, well, I know that got me very excited for our January episode and the content.
I thought you were going to say, got me very excited that we're going to do the interview again.
No.
We just decided that we're no longer going to do shows in early December when everything is so intense.
It's like a tidal wave is coming towards us, and then we were like, let's just do an episode in between it, like before the wave hits, which is fun, but I don't know how fun it is for you. I think it's probably fun. We're like a chaotic good.
Absolutely. I can't even talk anymore. Absolutely.
This is a very sleep-deprived Bassem Haddad.
And this is MK Smith signing off from Washington.
See you next time.